The deed is in my name now. You've got until Friday to be out. My son said it as if he were offering a courtesy, not a sentence. The words ricocheted around the kitchen I'd cooked in for 34 years, the same room where I taught him long division with jelly beans and smoothed his hair the night he didn't make varsity. I am Miriam Caldwell, 68, retired physics teacher. 2 months ago, my only child tried to evict me from my own house. Across the maple table, Daniel kept a salesman's smile fixed in place. His wife Brooke stood a half step behind a manicure resting on his shoulder like a stamp of ownership. Her diamond flashed every time she moved a metronome to his confidence. "What are you talking about?" I heard my voice come out calm, the way it did during lab accidents. The calm that meant I was measuring angles and observing vectors, not panicking. Daniel slid a folder across the table. "It's all in there, Mom. It's legal. Dad's will had a vertical, provision we could exercise. We found you a great condo in Sarasota. Elevator pool close to a clinic. You'll love it." "For someone my age," I said. "For someone who deserves comfort," Brooke answered, syrup over glass. "It's too much house to manage. You've been forgetful." I opened the folder. Photocopies of a property transfer. A notary stamp. Signatures that mimicked my handwriting the way a mockingbird mimics a car alarm. Dates from exactly 2 months ago. Beside them, a single line in print seller asserts she understands the transfer. "Last month," Brooke continued, "you couldn't find the garage remote and accused Daniel of moving it. You borrowed my car," I said mildly. "The remote was in your gym bag." A flush passed over her cheekbones before the composure returned. "You see, this defensiveness worries us. 40 years in a classroom trained me to spot patterns. First the thermostat that kept resetting to 80 while I slept. Then my pill organizer mistakenly refilled with a different brand that made my head swim. Messages rescheduled that I was sure I'd confirmed. Comments dropped like breadcrumbs, so many stares. These taxes are brutal. Do you still remember your passwords?" A pattern takes shape, one small data point at a time. "And if I refuse to leave?" I asked. Daniel's smile twitched. "The paperwork is filed. The title's already recorded. There's no reason to make this difficult." I let my finger rest on the notary stamp. "When exactly did I sign this?" 2 months ago, Brooke cut in too quickly. "After brunch at the Blackbird Cafe, we all discussed it." "We discussed whether the salmon was overcooked," I said. Her mouth curved not quite a smile. "You're confused, Miriam." I stood, shut the folder, and gathered it as if I were tidying after a meeting that had overrun its slot. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice settling into the tone that once quieted a room of juniors. "This conversation is finished. Please leave." Brooke's chin lifted. "We'll give you until Friday to pack essentials. Movers arrive at noon." "Get out, Daniel," I said without looking at her. He took a step back before he could stop himself. When the front door latched behind them, I set my phone on the counter, watched the digits of the microwave clock climb 1 minute to 3. I gave myself 7 minutes to cry, no more. Then I wiped my face, rinsed the cloth, and dialed the number I kept written on the back of a recipe card in my mother's handwriting. "Alan Pierce," the voice answered, warm and steel at once. "It's Miriam," I said. "We have to activate the contingency." A beat. "Tell me what they did." "They say I signed the house over 2 months ago. Well, apparently I was in 2 places at once. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "Don't touch anything they brought. And Miriam, remember our rule. Let them believe they've already won," I said. Months earlier, after Frank, my husband, died, Alan had been the one who suggested I move a portion of my savings into a trust under my maiden name. "It's an umbrella you hope you never open," he'd said. We tucked $750,000 away and told no one. I walked the length of the hallway while I waited, pausing at the photographs that turned years into paper. Daniel on a seesaw grinning into sunlight. Frank and me with a trout that never fit the frame. The day of Daniel's wedding tuxedo too tight at the collar, all charm and promise. My retirement party and June cake. I didn't like speeches. I didn't deserve my son's arm around my shoulders. "We're proud of you, Mom," he'd said, echoing Frank's old praise. Pride has a peculiar aftertaste when it sours. Alan arrived with a yellow legal pad and the particular focus I've seen only on surgeons and trial lawyers. We sat at the kitchen table, the folder between us, like a small animal that might bite. "They come back Friday," he said. "With movers," I answered. "Noon." He made notes in a tight hand. "We'll be ready." I hadn't known that anger could be so clean. It slid into my bones and settled there, steadying what grief had loosened. Friday came with weather that couldn't make up its mind. Sun cloud, a smudge of rain that never fully committed. I sat on the porch swing with a cardigan over my shoulders and 2 glasses of water on the side table, the way my mother had hosted arguments, hydrated and in the shade. The street filled with the guttural idle of 2 moving trucks and the glossy purr of Daniel's imported car. They walked up the path without looking at me, eyes locked on a front door they believed already belonged to them. Confidence, I thought, is often a costume. "Hello, Daniel," said the woman standing beside me. He stopped as if he'd hit a pane of glass. "Judge Lila Moreno," he said, the name falling out of him without permission. Your mother asked me to be present, Lila said. She tells me she has a report to file. Color drained from his face. Brooks did not. She had a different talent. Whatever she's told you is a misunderstanding, Brooks said crisply. We have signed documents. Fraudulent documents, Alan said, stepping from the shade of the porch column. And proof to that effect. I lifted the folder and held it casually the way one holds a thing one can replace because there are multiple copies in multiple places. You should have checked where I was, I said. On the day this was supposedly notarized, I was at my sister's cabin in Idaho making jam and losing arguments about card games. You'll find the photographs online. The notary who stamped these was in Port Victoria at a mortgage closing. Her calendar and GPS say so. Brooks' mouth opened, then closed. Something in her calculation faltered. She hadn't prepared for a variable. We're worried about you, Mom, Daniel said, trying to change the axis of the conversation. You've been mixing up dates. You get agitated. I get agitated when my life is altered without consent, I said. It's a side effect of awe and rage. We can explain, he began, reaching out, palm up. I stood. No explanations, not to me. Hey, Chippy. The swing creaked and fell silent. A breeze carried the smell of cut grass and something faintly metallic from the trucks. You have until sundown to get those vehicles off my property, I said. After that, conversations about title and signatures will continue in rooms with microphones and stenographers. Daniel glanced at the trucks the way a man looks at a boat he realizes too late he cannot afford. Brooke inhaled like she was swallowing something bitter. Miriam, she said, gentling her voice, we're trying to keep you safe. Stairs, burglaries, scams. You read the news. I taught teenagers to wire circuits without electrocuting themselves. I can operate a lock and a phone. Lila rested a hand on the porch rail, her face unreadable. Alan's pen clicked and stilled. I did not wait for their answer. I turned open my door and walked into my house. The screen whispered shut. Through the glass, I could see them still standing there, held in place by a new gravity, the kind that descends when a story told too many times stops working. Inside, in the cool dim of the hallway, I put the folder on the sideboard and pressed my palm against the wall. The paint was smooth and beneath it wood. A surface is never the whole. Any physicist will tell you that. Behind me, the trucks idled, then coughed, then idled again. I went to the kitchen and set a kettle on the stove. I had water to boil. The kettle began to hum. Outside, the trucks coughed themselves quiet. I poured water over tea leaves and watched them bloom to the color of mahogany, the kitchen filling with a smell that had carried me through exams and funerals alike. When I carried the cup to the sink, the driveway was empty. Only 2 dark tattoos of rubber marked where the trucks had waited. 2 days later, the phone vibrated against the cutting board while I trimmed tulips to fit a crystal vase. I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. Mom, you need to stop. Daniel's voice was low, hard-edged in a way that didn't belong to the boy who once cried over a broken clay volcano. You're making a mistake. By defending my home, I kept my tone even and eased a snapped stem into the trash. This house is too much for you. You're getting older. What happens if you fall on the stairway again? People worry. Which people, I asked? Silence, the kind that grows when someone is building a story they can live with. There are witnesses who saw you sign, he said finally. And Dr. Vale is prepared to testify about your cognitive decline. Dr. Vale, I repeated. Brooks' cousin's husband. He's my physician, Daniel snapped. Your physician, I said, not mine. The real doctor who'd known me for 2 decades, Dr. Edith Landry, had retired in the winter. Her new partner, Dr. Philip Vale, had introduced himself with a smile, a clipboard, and a prescription that made the hallway tilt. I had flushed the pills down the toilet and kept the bottle like a fossil. Interesting that your witnesses placed me in Port Victoria the same weekend I was posting photos from my sister's cabin, I said, picturing the apricot jam that never set. Dates are stubborn things. You're confused again, he said, and the old ache, the one that blooms when someone insists your reflection isn't yours, pressed under my ribs. No, I said, I'm clear. I hung up, wiped my hands, and called Alan. They're building out a case, I told him, including a doctor. This moves us into a different lane, he said. If they file for emergency guardianship, you'll be fighting on 2 fronts. We'll need documentation and we'll need it fast. That afternoon, a courier rang the bell. Ms. Caldwell Legal Service, an envelope with the logo of Cranston and Bly. Inside, a petition for temporary guardianship and a competency evaluation stamped for a hearing in 5 days. The language was careful and poisonous, concerned confusion risk. Attached was an exhibit listing recent incidents, a lopsided ledger of misplaced keys and missed appointments, most of which had explanations I could recite half asleep. I set the petition flat on the dining table and took out the black notebook from the bottom drawer of the buffet. I had begun it months earlier after the morning I woke woozy and found my blood pressure pills swapped for a look-alike that numbed my tongue. The notebook was not a diary, it was a log. Date time, event variable. Thermostat set to 80 at 2:10 a.m., No scheduled change. Refilled pill case lot number different. Appointment with roofer moved calendar entry adjusted from my laptop while I was at the grocery. In the margins, I had written possible explanations, then crossed them out as the pattern thickened. When I finished adding Cranston and Bly to the log, I went to the hall closet and pulled my mother's canvas tote, the one she'd taken to school board meetings, over my shoulder. The strap still smelled faintly of chalk. I drove to Seaboard Trust Bank on Ferry Avenue, where the manager knew me by name and my preference for paper statements. Elliot Ramos stood as I approached his glass-walled office, his tie slightly askew, the way kind men's ties often are by mid-afternoon. "Ms. Caldwell, how can I help?" "I need to access my box and verify my account activity," I said, "and I'd like to speak to your fraud department." He glanced past me toward the lobby, then back. "Let's start with your box." In the privacy room, I turned the tiny key in the lock and slid out the metal drawer. Inside lay the things we kept when we believed they could protect us: the original deed, Frank's will with the unamended codicil, a folder with insurance policies Daniel had never seen, and a stack of envelopes I had labeled with dates. I took what I needed and added an empty manila envelope also labeled, because sometimes theater has its uses. Back at Elliot's desk, I placed my driver's license, the box inventory, and a printed list of my accounts on the blotter. "Has anyone requested access to my records?" He typed, paused, typed again, his face tightening by degrees. "There was an online transfer requested last week from your checking to a new account. Our system flagged it. The IP trace places the request in Mesa, Arizona." "I haven't been to Arizona in 10 years, I said. "We denied the transfer," he continued. "But yesterday we received a power of attorney we did not have on file, purporting to grant your son authority. Our legal team suspended action pending verification." A cold, clean feeling washed through me, the kind that makes you stand up straighter. "Freeze every account in my name until after the hearing," I said, "and initiate a transfer from my savings to this trust account." I slid a slip with numbers written in my small teacher's hand. Elliot's eyebrows rose. "That's nearly the whole balance." "Then you'll process it quickly," I said, and allowed myself the smallest smile. While we waited for signatures to print, a young teller at the far window glanced toward us, then away. Jay Dawson, the one who always asked about my garden and wrote his J's like treble clefs. He looked nervous. I filed the observation and signed where Elliot pointed. On my way out, I felt a prickle at the base of my neck, the sensation of being watched that any woman learns to trust by 40. Near the brochure rack, pretending to study mortgage rates, stood Dale Whitfield Brooks' brother, whose opinions on wine took up entire dinners. He turned to page 2 slowly, eyes skimming not the interest tables, but the glass of Elliot's office door. I rested my tote higher on my shoulder and walked past him. In the reflection, I watched him count my steps. At home, I made a sandwich I did not want and ate it at the sink. Then I called a number not in my contacts, Lydia, park director at North Harbor Senior Center, where I volunteered teaching email to people who could still write letters better than any inbox reply. "Ellie," she said, the old family nickname. "You're never a daytime caller. What's wrong?" "I need to run a set of standard cognitive assessments with a group of our sharpest," I said. "Voluntary, of course. And I'll need their signed statements." "We don't usually." "I know what we usually do," I said gently. "This isn't usual." Lydia did not ask more. "We have the kind of friendship that knows where the rails are." "I can have 15 by morning, more by afternoon," she said. "Bring clipboards." The next day, the activity room smelled like dry erase markers and oatmeal cookies. We laid out the MMSE, the Mokae, and the clock drawing test that reduces competence to a circle and numbers and hands at a specified time. I took one set of each myself at the long table by the windows, writing my name with the care of a student who doesn't want the teacher to know she's the teacher. Around me, engineers, a librarian, a retired pilot, 2 former accountants, and a pianist I adored filled in their answers, their movements neat and unhurried. When each finished, Lydia slid an affidavit across the table. "I took this assessment voluntarily on this date, in this room, under these conditions." "Is this about your son?" asked Mrs. Dennison, the pianist, her pencil still in her hand. "It's about me," I said, which in some households comes to the same thing. Lydia scanned and saved everything into folders labeled with dates and initials stored on 2 drives in a cloud I paid for in cash at a pharmacy because I do not like my digital life tidy enough to tempt anyone. By mid-afternoon, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened in the hallway to Jay's careful voice. "Ms. Caldwell, this is Jay from Seaboard. I probably shouldn't be calling, but you were always kind to me. Your son came in with a court order for your records. He wasn't polite. They're looking for where some money went, and they're angry they can't find it. Please be careful." I sat on the stairs, hand on the banister Frank had sanded himself, remembering the day Daniel slid down that rail and split his lip on the newel post, then cried until I made ice cubes into animals and let him hold a frozen giraffe to his mouth. Children learn quickly where they are safe, and later what they can take for granted. The doorbell rang at 4:13. When I opened it, a figure in a hoodie stood on the porch steps, hands jammed deep into the pocket. The boy looked up. Noah, my grandson. 17. Taller than I remembered, his face thinner, Frank's eyes staring out of Daniel's bones. Gran, he said, and the word cracked. You're alone, I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. They think I'm at debate practice. I stepped back and let him in, closed the door, and by force of ritual made hot chocolate in a saucepan, real cocoa and milk with a pinch of cinnamon. Noah watched like he was 5 again, trusting that something warm could be made in a small pot. We sat at the kitchen table, the same blue wood grain where his father had delivered his eviction and lost a kind of sonhood he couldn't reclaim. Dad says you're confused, Noah began, staring into the steam. Do I seem confused to you? He lifted his gaze to mine and held it. No, you seem mad. That's accurate, I said, and slid the mug closer to him. I am angry, and I am in possession of facts. Are they? He stopped hunting for a sentence that would not crack in his mouth. Are they taking you somewhere? They're trying, I said. And they're using the court to dress it up as concern. Noah's jaw worked. He had always been the quiet child in his noisy household, the one who rinsed plates without being asked, who learned early that peace is sometimes the only gift you can give. I heard them talking last week, he said, about Dad's fund, Harbor-like Capital. It's not going well. He said he needed bridge capital and time to make investors whole. Mom told him she's done holding the bag. He looked sick, saying it like he was betraying someone and saving them at once. What else, I asked. Mom was scanning old photos, he said reluctantly. From when you were younger. I asked why. She said she wanted to make a slideshow for your birthday, but she hid her laptop when I came in. They weren't just building a legal scaffold, they were decorating it. Noah put the mug down too hard. Chocolate sloshed. I know her cloud password, he said, and then flinched at his own boldness. I'm not going to steal anything, but I can look. You're 17, I said. Your job is to get into a good college and not set anything on fire. I can do both, he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched toward something that might be a smile later in a different life. I don't want them to hurt you. Oh. I reached across and covered his hand. You're not responsible for what your parents do, but information has a way of keeping people honest. I let the sentence sit. Noah nodded. I'll see what I can find. He left before the sun went down, scuffing his sneaker against the porch step the way he always had as a child, the sound of a person reluctant to exit a safe space. After the door closed, I called Alan again. I may have a line on documents, I told him. We'll need someone to preserve and analyze anything you get, he said. Not just screenshots. Chain of custody matters. I know a name, I said, and surprised myself by doing so. Years of teaching had made me a Rolodex with shoes. At 8 that evening, Rhea Patel unrolled a cable on my dining table and set up 2 laptops, as if she were laying out surgical instruments. She had once worked for a federal cyber unit and now wore her competence like a windbreaker, practical zipped ready for weather. Mr. Pierce gave me the gist, she said. We'll do this clean. I won't touch anything I shouldn't. Your grandson can lawfully grant access to anything that belongs to him or to shared accounts where he is an authorized user. We will make read-only copies, generate hashes, and document everything we touch. Noah texted at 8:30. They're out to dinner with the Havermans. I have Mom's laptop. I can send credentials via Signal. Rhea glanced at me impressed despite herself. Smart kid, she said. Also tell him to turn off photo sync after he's done. We don't want timestamps that don't make sense. 10 minutes later, she said, we're in. The screen filled with folders so neat they were almost smug. Taxes, receipts, photos, legal, and a folder labeled family care that made my heart thump a hard, irritated beat. Rhea opened legal. An email thread near the top glittered with names I recognized and some I did not. Carson Bly from Cranston and Bly, Tessa Rourke Brooks' cousin who worked as a clerk for Judge Calder, and Daniel's personal account which I had not seen since he was 13 and used it to write me rhapsodies about a gaming console I never bought. Subject title, transfer guardianship timeline, Daniel had written 2 months ago. Need title recorded by 3:15. If Miriam resists file for emergency evaluation, Tessa can help with scheduling, Vale can provide background, Brooke handling PR with family, financial situation urgent. Rhea whistled under her breath. They're planning and writing. Incompetence, Alan said from the doorway. He had come without knocking per my request that he treat my house like his office. Not legal incompetence, human. Rhea clicked open family care. Inside cognitive assessment strategy, a dossier X. The document detailed minor missteps and magnified them, a missed dental cleaning, a burned pot, the thermostat entries. There were screenshots of my texts asking Daniel if he had my snow shovel a joke. We made every winter, and a photo Brooke had taken of my refrigerator with a milk carton 2 days past its date, annotated with red arrows. Farther down, a reminder to encourage confusion episodes, which made my jaw ache. Save it, Alan said. We kept going. In photos, Ria clicked a subfolder titled San Jose. Images of a stucco house with blue shutters and a bougainvillea the color of a bruise. A PDF confirmation of a wire deposit in US dollars to a realtor in Costa Rica. Another PDF International Academy of San Jose enrollment deposits for fall student named Noah Caldwell. I steadied the back of a chair until the floor stopped feeling like a boat. In receipts, there was an invoice from a company that makes Faraday bags the kind that block cell signals and a draft shopping list for moving day, bubble-wrap storage bins. Sharpies, comforter bags. Brooke's handwriting at the bottom in a tidy, stylish script. Remember passports. Ria moved to a folder titled Harbor Light. Do you want me to? Yes, I said. Spreadsheets opened like origami lines and columns flattening into meaning. Capital inflows, outflows, projected returns that only worked as long as new money came in. Investor distribution schedules that looked less like investment and more like musical chairs. Alan leaned in, breath held. This is a Ponzi, he said, less a declaration than an exhale. On the screen, an email from Daniel to Carson Bly slid into view. If we can secure 1.4 M by end of month, I can meet obligations and prevent litigation. Without it, we're exposed. Ria clicked another link, an anonymized messaging app log between Brooke and someone saved as Tessa C. We need the hearing before Friday. She's moving money. Tessa had replied, working it. Ria made forensic images of the folders, generated verification hashes, and wrote down file paths in a spiral notebook that had once said Yosemite on the cover before time scraped letters away. When she finished, she closed the laptop and sat back. You have a lot, she said. Enough to defend yourself. Maybe enough to do more than that. But I only care about the first part. I looked at the evidence arrayed like a place setting. Title, timeline, manipulation, flight, fraud. All neat. All documented. The door creaked. Air shifted. Noah stepped back into the dining room, cheeks flushed from the cool night and from what he had done. They're on their way home, he said. I put everything back the way it was. Ria nodded approval. Good work, she said, and the praise seemed to put steel into the boy's spine. Noah looked at the stack of copies, the drive case, the notebook. Is this going to fix it? He asked, and for a moment I saw the child who once believed duct tape could hold the world together. It's going to help me tell the truth, I said. His shoulders dropped to release more than a collapse. Okay. After Ria left, after Alan signed a chain of custody form he'd drawn up on my printer and carried the sealed drive to his car, after Noah hugged me hard enough to press the breath from my lungs, I washed 3 wine glasses no one had used and set them upside down on a towel. I do that when I don't know what to do next. Some small task that ends clean. The next morning, a slim white envelope slid through the mail slot. Order to show cause, the hearing set for Tuesday at 9. I held the paper and watched dust dance in the strip of light. My phone chimed. A text from Daniel. Stop this nonsense. Cooperate and we'll let you take your personal things. Fight and you'll lose everything. I took a photo of the text and forwarded it to Alan. Then I walked to the study, opened the bottom drawer of Frank's desk, and lifted out the wooden box that held what we had called in our private language the good pen. It was the pen Frank used to sign mortgage papers and college forms, and the napkin contract we wrote the day we decided to stay in this house forever. I pressed the clip, felt the balance of it in my hand, and carried it to the dining table. There, under the window where rosemary watered the air when the sun came through, I lined up what needed signatures. Some papers require ink, the way some moments require breath. I sat, uncapped the pen, and wrote my name where it belonged. By mid-morning, the house had the clipped quiet of a classroom before an exam. I set 3 glasses on the coffee table, a legal pad on the arm of the chair, and a tin cookie box bright with snowmen beside the coasters. Ria had smiled when I found it, a homemade Faraday cage she'd said, tapping the metal lid, phones inside lid on. At 11:52, the doorbell rang. I opened it to Daniel in a pressed blue shirt, Brooke in a dress the color of tulips after rain. Both wore the careful expressions of people arriving at a negotiation they think they can steer. Thank you for agreeing to talk, Brooke said, voice velveted. We're only here to make arrangements, Daniel added. Then let's arrange, I said, and stepped back. Phones in the tin, all 3. I held out my hand. Daniel frowned. That's not necessary. It is, I said. You can collect them when we're done. They hesitated, then dropped their devices, my own already inside. The lid sealed with a soft metallic click. The room felt simpler. Alan rose from the armchair near the window. Daniel. Brooke. He nodded as if greeting opposing counsel in a hallway. A folder lay on his knee, closed and heavy. Brooke's eyes cooled. We weren't told your lawyer would be here. You brought yours to my door the other day, I said. We're even. We sat. I didn't offer tea. I didn't ask if they were comfortable. In the quiet, the wall clock made an honest sound. We can spare each other's speeches, I said. I have documents. You have decisions. Brooke lifted her chin. We have a recorded deed. I opened the first folder, and I have a notary's attestation that her stamp was misused that day, supported by GPS records that place her across town at a mortgage closing. I also have photographs with metadata showing me in Idaho at my sister's kitchen table that same afternoon. Alan placed a second folder on the table. Email threads between you, Carson Bly and Tessa Rourke, discussing a guardianship timeline and venue, a document titled Cognitive Assessment Strategy, cataloging minor slips and how to amplify them, receipts for Faraday bags, a real estate deposit in Costa Rica, an enrollment confirmation for the International Academy of San Jose in Noah's name, spreadsheets from Harborlight that only make sense if new money covers old obligations. Daniel's hands flattened against his knees, then curled. You went through our private, shared family accounts to which an authorized user granted access, Alan said evenly. Forensic images were made. Chain of custody is intact. Brooke's mouth shaped a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is a misunderstanding that has gotten out of hand. We wanted what was best for you. We followed advice. Advice, I said, doesn't explain forged signatures or a petition to remove my rights. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, if certain investors don't get paid, they won't just file suits. These aren't gentle people. I was trying to keep everyone safe. By emptying my accounts and moving me out of my house, I said. Safety for whom? His gaze skittered away. For a moment, I saw the boy who once knocked on our bedroom door after a nightmare breath-hitching, insisting he could handle it alone, then collapsing into his father's arms. Alan clicked his pen and set it down. Here's what's on the table, he said, unclipping a sheaf of papers and sliding the top two across to them. A restricted agreement for immediate resolution. Brooke didn't touch it. Daniel scanned the first page, eyes moving the way his father's used to over instruction manuals he never admitted needing. I spoke before Brooke could. First, you withdraw the guardianship petition today. You file a retraction acknowledging that the supporting narrative included inaccuracies and that I am capable of managing my affairs. You instruct Dr. Vale to refrain from offering any opinion about me to the court. Alan ticked a finger. Second title is restored. A quitclaim deed executed today delivered to the recorder by courier. Any power of attorney created without my client's knowledge is voided in writing. Third, I said, and felt the weight of the next words settle where grief had hollowed a place. You will return funds to those who entrusted you with them. A restitution pool is identified in the agreement. I will contribute a defined sum from my trust as a loan secured by this house. You will liquidate specified non-exempt assets and cooperate with a forensic accountant. Disbursements go directly to investors according to a schedule in the appendix. Daniel's head jerked up. You'd help after. I'm ensuring the damage doesn't spread, I said. Brooke found her voice. And if we don't sign this gift... Alan slid another folder slightly closer. Then, at 5 this afternoon, these drives and affidavits will be delivered to the district attorney, the state securities division, and federal authorities. The guardianship petition will be answered with a motion to sanction for abuse. Your passports will be at issue. I wouldn't plan on boarding any planes. Silence touched every surface in the room. Through the window, a neighbor's wind chime sounded fourths clear and thin. Brooke lifted the first page of the agreement. Her eyes snagged on a paragraph midway down. Therapy, she said, incredulous. That is in there, I said. Individual and couples of sessions for as long as the forensic accountant is engaged. Attendance verified monthly. Daniel's laugh was shorter than he meant it to be. This is punishment dressed as paperwork. It's a condition of help, I said, not a request. He pushed back from the coffee table and stood walking to the window and back. When he sat again, he looked older, not ruined, but scraped. You're asking me to confess to my son, he said quietly. I am asking you to tell him the truth, I said. He has already earned it. Brooke's composure cracked. You would poison our child against us, she said, voice vibrating. You did that work yourselves, I answered, and did not raise my tone. Daniel put his face in his hands. For a long moment, the room held only the steady click of the clock and the faint rumble of a truck 3 blocks away. Finally, he lifted his head. What guarantees do we have that after we sign, you don't hand everything to the authorities anyway? Alan tapped the signature page. Section 9. Upon full compliance with the terms, the undersigned agrees to maintain confidentiality and to refrain from voluntary referrals. Noncompliance, however, voids the provision. Brooke looked to Daniel. We can fight this, she said in a low rush. We still have a path? He didn't look at her. He looked at me. Whatever calculation lived in that glance had nothing to do with law and everything to do with a table, a house, a history. What pen? He asked. I set Frank's pen on the table between us. Daniel's mouth twitched, grief crossing his face like a cloud. Of course, he said. That one. He read. Brooke read behind him, lips moving, finger-tracing lines she didn't like. When they reached the page that required signatures, Daniel lifted the pen, paused, and looked at me again. Will he? He stopped, swallowed. Will Noah be in the room when I tell him? Yes, I said. He signed. Brooke hesitated, then signed letters sharp enough to cut. Alan gathered the pages with the efficiency of a man who has sat in too many rooms like this. I'll make the call to the clerk, he said. We need a stamped withdrawal on the docket. Now, I said. He stepped into the hallway with my landline. In the living room, Brooke stared at the snowman tin as if it might open by itself. Daniel rubbed the bridge of his nose with his thumb and forefinger, a gesture Frank used when a decision was made and the only thing left was to carry it. When Alan returned, the relief in his eyes was professional, not personal. Filed, he said, and handed me a printout. Stamped at 12:43. I took the cookie tin to the kitchen, lifted the lid, and set their phones on the counter. You can have them when we leave, I said. Alan's car, conference room at his office. Noah is already on his way. Brooke flinched. You called our son behind our backs. I invited him to a conversation about his family, I said. We drove separately. The sky had gone to a pale, indecisive gray. At stoplights, I watched Daniel's turn signal blink steady as the metronome Mr. Ignatius used when he taught me scales as a girl. In the reflection of my windshield, my face looked like my mother's when she waited outside principal meetings composed because it had to be. Alan's office smelled faintly of coffee and copy paper. In Conference A, Rhea sat with a closed laptop and a hard drive case at her elbow. Martin Gray, the forensic accountant Alan had called that morning, placed a legal pad square to the table's edge. Noah was already there in a chair that made him look briefly like a child again. His long legs folded awkwardly, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles blanched. Dad, he said, standing, then stopping halfway, unsure whether to hug the man he adored and didn't recognize. Daniel reached across the table and didn't try to pull his son in. Sit, he said softly. We did. I took the seat beside Noah and kept my hands in my lap. Alan slid a single sheet toward Daniel. Begin with this, he said. Short, factual, then speak. Daniel read the statement aloud. Title petition withdrawn, deed to be retitled. Cooperation with financial review. His voice catching on certain nouns. Then he folded the paper and set it aside. Everything I'm about to say is my fault, he said to Noah. No one pressured me. I made choices that hurt people. Noah's throat worked. He didn't speak. Daniel told it the way a man tells an unpleasant diagnosis steadily without euphemism. He described Harbor Light's early returns, the turbulence that followed the decision to mask losses with new money, the nights on the office floor doing math he didn't let his wife see. He described fear and then the plan that grew from it, branching into rooms of the house, my house without permission. Brooke stared at the table mascara unflinching. When he finished, Noah looked at his father for a long time. You wanted to put Gran in a place, he said finally, and take her money. Daniel didn't look away, yeah. Noah nodded once as if adding a column. He turned to me. Are you okay? He asked, and the simple question broke something I hadn't realized I'd been holding together with habit. I am, I said. Today I am. Alan cleared his throat. We have signatures, he said to the room as if reminding us what had already been decided. We have a timetable for filings. Martin will oversee transfers. Brooke's chair creaked. Are we done? She asked, voice flat. Not yet, I said. I reached into my tote and placed the snowman tin on the table again. Noah's eyes flicked to it and back to me. I opened it, took out my phone, and slid the tin toward Daniel and Brooke. When we're in this room, we talk to each other, I said. No calls, no messages, not for this hour. Brooke let out a small disbelieving sound, then dropped her phone into the tin. Daniel followed the act almost ceremonial. Martin began outlining what he needed. Account lists, contact information, a sequence of transfers, nothing fancy. Rhea noted timestamps. Alan initialed the margin where the agreement required it. The work made a hum in the room, a dull, necessary music. Noah leaned toward me. Can I? He stopped. Can I come by tonight just to sit? Yes, I said. When the papers were done for the day, Alan gathered the signatures and slid them into a Redwell. Daniel signed a final line and pushed the pen across the table to me. Frank's pen warmed by his hand. Our fingers did not touch. We stood. The chairs scraped back. Brooke walked to the window and pressed her fingertips to the glass as if testing the world outside for temperature. Daniel looked at his son. I'm sorry, he said, and the two words landed in the space between them like something heavy set down carefully. Noah nodded, swallowed, and nodded again. I tucked the tin under my arm, the lid clucking quietly with each step. On the way out, I paused at the door to the conference room and looked at the table. Paper pens, a coil of cable, 2 empty glasses. The ordinary evidence of a day that had not been ordinary. Alan handed me a stamped copy of the withdrawal from the court, still tacky with ink. For your records, he said. I slid it into my tote beside the wooden box, and the notebook weight balanced pages neat. Then I walked into the hall, my shoes making soft sounds on the carpet, and reached for the elevator button. The elevator doors closed with a hush, and the stamped withdrawal warmed the inside of my tote like a small square hearth. Outside, the sky had thinned to a pale gray, the kind that makes porches and kitchens glow. I drove home without the radio the way I did after parent-teacher nights, head full, hands steady on the wheel. 3 weeks later, I was in the garden with pruning shears, deadheading roses so new buds had room. The air smelled of damp earth and rosemary. A car door thumped at the curb. Need help? Noah asked, backpack hanging from one shoulder. Always, I said, handing him gloves. He worked beside me, careful with thorns the way he'd always been careful with people. Dad's cooking tonight, he said after a time, almost smiling. He says lasagna can't be that hard. Ambitious, I said. He burned the garlic last time. Noah clipped a spent bloom and set it gently in the bucket. He's trying. We didn't say what lay behind the sentence, the meetings with Martin at Alan's office. The restitution schedule printed on thick paper. The wire transfers that went out in quiet streaks. Harbor light folded down like a tent after a storm. In Alan's conference room earlier that week, Martin had walked us through the tallies with a pencil. We're at 81% recovered, he'd said, tapping the column that mattered. The rest is on a timed track. Distributions will finish by the close of quarter. If we keep the budget you drafted, the mortgage is manageable. He looked at me, then Daniel. No improvising. No one in the room had laughed. Daniel sat straighter than I'd seen him sit, in months the posture of a man who had put down a heavy thing he'd been carrying too long. Brooke's chair stayed empty from then on. She sent one email through Carson Bly's office authorizing releases and another message short and formal about forwarding her mail. Both arrived without punctuation that sounded like a person. On a Wednesday, Alan spread new documents across my dining table with the quiet of a ritual. Trust amendment, he said, as we discussed. The pages smelled like toner and a little like rain. Half my estate would be held for Noah with staged distributions, the other half for Daniel delayed and contingent, the house to be kept in a restricted family trust. After I was done with it, no sale, no loan against it, only use. People will say it's complicated, I said, taking Frank's pen from its wooden box. Good. Alan watched me sign. When I finished, he laid his hand over mine for the span of a breath and moved it away. Not because anyone was looking, but because the moment had the shape of patience. Brooke appeared on my porch the following month in a camel coat despite the mild day. She looked thinner, precise, a person who had ironed a life and found the fabric different underneath. I won't come in, she said, staying on the top step. I'm moving to Chicago. There's a position. I wanted you to hear it from me. I appreciate that, I said. She glanced past me into the hall where the photographs hung, catching the one where she and Daniel stood under paper lanterns, grinning the grin I had once believed. I'm sorry, she said, as if testing the weight of the words, for my part in it. Thank you, I said. It was true, and it was enough for the space between us. If Noah calls, she added, looking away, tell him I'm learning to listen. I will, I said. When she left, the porch step kept a faint echo a second longer than her footsteps required, as if saving the sound for anyone who needed it later. At the senior center, Lydia rolled a whiteboard into the room and set out chairs in a loose U. On the board, I wrote in block letters, Financial Self-Defense for Women. The first session began with a handful of faces and grew each week until the folding chairs had to be borrowed from the auditorium. We talked about account titles and beneficiaries, about the difference between care and control, about how to keep a notebook that could be lifted to a judge without embarrassment. Mrs. Dennison set her pencil down after the third class and said, It is a relief to call things by their names. I nodded and passed out more clipboards. On a Thursday, Daniel arrived at my house in a second-hand sedan that still smelled faintly of someone else's clone. He sat on the porch swing like a man remembering how to share furniture. I have a job, he said, eyes on the street. Staff accountant. It's honest work. Good, I said. He rested his elbows on his knees. Noah's application essay mentioned wiring a lamp with you in 7th grade. He wrote about light and specificity. He swallowed. He didn't show it to me until after he sent it. He's telling you things now. I ask and he answers, Daniel said. I don't push. We swung a little. The chains made a small, clean sound. When he stood to go, he looked at the front windows at the porch at the Magnolia that had outlived 3 owners before us. This house feels different, he said. It is, I said. He nodded once as if he'd been waiting for permission to notice. Some evenings Alan stopped by after court with a paper bag of lemons from a clerk's backyard. For the pitcher, he'd say, and I'd slice them into thin suns and float them in cold water. We sat on the steps and watched neighbors walk dogs that knew our names. When a breeze came up from the harbor, he'd pull his tie loose and tell me something small from his day, a juror's question, a judge's aside. If I asked about retirement, he shrugged the way men shrug when they are not yet finished. On a morning in late summer, the final 2 wires went out under Martin's supervision, and he clicked his pen closed like a starter's pistol turned backward. That completes investors on the schedule, he said. He shook Daniel's hand, then mine. My office will monitor quarterly reporting. After he left, the house exhaled. I could feel it in the floors. I made tea and carried 2 cups to the porch. Noah arrived after lunch with a stack of computer science textbooks and a grin that kept daring itself to stay. We sat in the shade and talked about sorting algorithms and the exact moment weather changes in this town. He reached into his backpack and brought out a photo he'd printed the three of us at the dining table the day we signed the first papers, me, Noah, and Daniel, all of us looking like we had just remembered the last line of a long equation. "Can we put it in the hall?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and we did. It fit beside the picture of the trout and under the paper lanterns, a new tile in a wall that kept its own counsel. That night, the house had the small sounds I know by heart: the tick of the clock over the stove, the faint hiss of air in the vents, the creak in the third stair, the one Frank could never fix. I washed the good pen with a soft cloth and returned it to the wooden box, my name newly practiced on documents that would live with my records. On the table, a lemon kept its color in the glass as the ice thinned. The porch swing held the shape of two people from an hour earlier. The garden smelled green even in the dark. When my phone buzzed, it was a single message from Daniel. "Noah home," I texted back. "Yes." A minute later, "Thank you." I set the phone face down and listened to the house hold itself together the way old houses do when no one is watching. The walls were the same width they'd always been. The door still stuck at the corners on humid days. The bedroom window still rattled if the wind came from the east. I walked down the hall past the photographs and turned off the lamp. In the glass, a faint reflection, the kind you only notice when car lights cross the window and keep going, passed over the room and was gone. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.